All right, on this week's video version of the podcast, we're doing something a little bit different. We are taking a mashup from a conversation with Dan Infalt in 2019 and a conversation with John Eberhart in 2020. And these two conversations have a lot of similarities in terms of when they are capitalizing on scrapes and when are they paying attention to them. So, pretty interesting conversation. Usually we have our Scrape Week content near the end of October, but we figured this would be valuable right now, so that's when we're sharing it. So, if you guys enjoy it, let us know, and we can put together some more mashups from all the conversations in the past. But for right now, let's go ahead and get right into it.
The goal of Scrape Week is for people to capitalize on their season, cut out time-wasting sits, and I guess I'll ask you, what are your thoughts on scrapes, and how do you go about hunting them?
Well, you look at the way people hunt. If you hunt over active scrapes and rubs, you're hunting the way 99% of the people hunt, so you're going to get the results that 99% of the people get. However, it's all about positioning. If those scrapes are where they move in daylight, I've killed a lot of big bucks on scrapes, but there's a lot of scrapes you find that are the size of a car hood I wouldn't hunt because of where they're located. Mm-hmm. Even if you're getting pictures off, you're going to find that you get the young, immature bucks or lots of deer off of these scrapes, but there's certain scrapes in their proximity to bedding or where daylight movement would be that you'll get the mature bucks. They work scrapes just like the other deer. And one interesting point is my two biggest whitetails that I've ever shot with a bow, both came off of scrapes, both in early September when the season just opened. And what I found is that when you get two big buck bedding areas next to each other, they'll put a scrape at the mutual staging area. And if you can find one of those scrapes, those bucks come right out to that scrape before they move on. And I've killed some giants on those scrapes. I killed a giant 11-pointer that was just shy of Boone and Crockett on a scrape like that on opening day. Wow. And I shot him at about, I think it was 1 in the afternoon. It was raining in the morning.
What?
And as soon as the rain stopped, I knew he'd go work that scrape. And I went out there, and he got right up out of his bed and came in, and I shot him. I was only out there like 15 minutes.
Wow, so you raced him out after as I'm guessing you were there right when the rain stopped, or right when the rain stopped you run out there?
I went out there. It was drizzling to like a sprinkle, and got out there, and right after it stopped, he came right in. It was an amazing hunt, an amazing season. It was, I'm such a hardcore hunter. I only hunted 15 minutes that season.
Yeah, by design. By design. What about the other one?
The other one, I was watching a giant from a parking lot come out to a scrape and work it, and there was actually two bucks. One came out of each bedding area, and they were working a scrape, and I could see them from the parking lot. And it's a parking lot. There's always 5-10 cars in, always. Mm-hmm. And I had a car back then, a station wagon, that I'd use as like a covert car, and I had I brake for coons sticker on it. I've told that story before, and people always joke about that. But I would park there and make believe I'm like reading a newspaper or something, and I'd watch that buck. And when I finally went in for the kill, the first one in was at 140, mm-hmm. And in those days that was a pretty tempting buck. But I knew that other buck was always in right after him, and I waited. And about the time he was almost out of sight, the bigger one came in, and I shot him. And that one is the one that got dubbed the 400-pound slob because when we put it on a scale, field dressed, it bottomed out at 300-pound scale. So we don't even know what it weighed. Mm-hmm. But the thing was a giant, had a chest on it like this. But on public land.
Yep, in September on a scrape. Yeah, that's where, I mean, when we thought of Scrape Week and when we looked at the calendar, we looked at, the end of October roughly, which I think everyone thinks that time. Obviously, one of the biggest misconceptions that we talk about quite a bit as well, too, is they're using those scrapes in September, but they become super noticeable during this time of year. So,
well, in October, they put down a lot more.
They
start just throwing them random spots, but those key spots are the ones that they use all year. And sometimes you can't even see it's a scrape. They'll come there and they'll just work the licking branch or just barely scrape the ground. It's not like a huge car hood scrape like in the fall. But I have killed good bucks in late October over scrapes too. But generally, it's the same situation where it's right next to bedding.
So I guess the big key takeaway is if you are hunting scrapes, try to get as close to bedding or possibly where there's two mature bucks.
We'll just think about why it's there. Why is this scrape here? Instead of just saying giant
That's
scrape,
right.
giant buck, tree stand.
Right.
You got to have a reason for why you hunt a place. There's terrain based or bedding based or whatever, but to just find sign and hunt over it is just the same thing everybody else does, and you can have the same results as everybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about just quickly some places you would not hunt over the scrapes, just real quick.
The middle of an oak ridge,
Mm-hmm.
Field edge, just a random spot in the woods. I want to see that it's near thick cover. I want to believe that there's bedding in the vicinity. I don't believe mature bucks, even when you're approaching rut, very often go wandering for miles. They go a short distance in daylight, and you got to be within that distance. So sign is key, but the sign needs to be where those deer will move in daylight, which is a very short window of movement.
Understood. What are your thoughts on putting cameras over scrapes for inventory, or do you do that at all?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter if the scrape's in the middle of the oak flat.
Yeah.
That's a good place for a camera.
Yep.
Because any buck that comes in that oak flat to feed is going to go over and smell who's been on the scrape or whatever, and you're going to get a picture of him. Might be at midnight, but now go back to, he's in the area.
Mm-hmm.
He's here. Now you hunt him, where you believe he is. You let your scouting dictate where to hunt. But you don't set a stand up over that scrape, unless, of course, you get surprised and the picture's at noon.
Yeah. That doesn't happen.
Doesn't happen often, but it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is there anything? I don't know. Scrapes are. This is what happens. And I fall into this. I know a lot of other people too. They put that camera up on a scrape. Maybe it isn't out in the middle of nowhere, but then they have a lot of bucks going in there. The problem is then they go and check the camera, and it's the same as getting that sit where you should have. There's going to be bucks there more than likely if you're already running that camera there prior. Maybe you check that camera on the fly, and then hunt it right then and there if they're coming in.
Generally, if I'm putting a camera over a scrape, unless it's your cell cam, I'm putting a camera over that scrape where I'm not going to hunt anyway. So if I spook them out of the area, I just want one picture.
Got it.
See, I'm not out there to fill a photo album.
Yeah.
I'm out there to find a target animal.
Mm-hmm.
Once I know he's on the property, I could care less about getting more pictures of him.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's kill mode.
Makes sense. Anything else that comes to mind with scrapes? We when this goes live, we'll have a ton of different content coming out, so it doesn't necessarily have to be long-winded. But I think the key early September, get out your notebook and keep that in mind and look for that. Let me ask you this actually: when you killed those 2 particular deer in September over scrapes, when did you know about those scrapes? Was the year prior? Did you find it the next spring or in the summer?
In both of those cases, I found them just prior and started glassing them.
Mm-hmm.
The big one I shot on opening day, I found a scrape when I saw the deer. I saw the deer.
I see.
I was running a ridge. I want to say it was in August, and this buck got up out of a bedding area and was wandering around, and I was watching him with binoculars on a hillside, and I watched him go in and work that scrape. And I had a really good advantage with a pretty steep drop in front of me. I knew the deer wasn't using. And I went out there a couple times and glassed him in the woods to where he was and got a pattern going, and then felt I could go in there and kill him. And I actually even went in there and videotaped him from up there in velvet. And then I went back and killed him out of that the tree where he kept working the scrape on opening day.
Got it. Anything else about scrapes that you feel passionate about that we didn't discuss? I think just the big takeaways are the September, finding them close to bedding or where there's reason for them to be there in the daylight. That's really what it boils down to. And then run those cameras for inventory outside where you don't plan on hunting, but they're going to be, the bucks in the area are going to go in there and hit that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
I found scrapes as early as I think August 23rd was the earliest I've ever seen scrapes. So what I will typically do is, of my 45 trees that I have prepped and ready to hunt going into the season, maybe 20 of them, let's just say 20 of them are early season locations because they're food locations, master fruit trees, or a scrape area that may be on the edge of a standing cornfield. What I'll do is I'll do a speed tour. And by a speed tour, I will dress in my scent lock, and I will go through and check only my early season hunting locations. I don't mess with my rut phase locations at all, but I'll just check my early season mast and fruit locations or scrape areas that are on the edge of crop fields if it's in standing corn. And then by doing that, I always do it after September 20th, because by September 20th, most of the mature bucks have been rubbed out since at least September 5th. So they're going to be rubbed out at least 2 weeks. So if I find a scrape area or a mast tree or a fruit tree that's dropping, there's also going to be some form of buck activity there. Obviously, scrapes are buck activity. But, if I check 20 trees, I will hunt the best trees for the first 2 or 3 days of the season based on the buck activity, how high the rubs are. The older bucks are, the higher the rubs are up on the trees, how active the scrapes are, does it have the right security cover there. It's going to have the right security cover there because that's the way I set them up.
Yep.
Unless it's next to a field where it has to be standing corn. So I have a rhyme and a reason to everything that I do. So even though I may have 20 early season locations, I may only hunt 3 of them. And they're going to be based on mass production, fruit production, and what kind of buck sign is at that location, and is it mature buck sign versus subordinate buck sign. Over half of the bucks that I've shot that are in the make the record book were shot at scrapes. It might have been at a destination fruit tree like an apple tree, or it might have been at a white oak or a red oak, but there was scrapes underneath the food trees. So I'm a huge scrape guy. But to me, if you're hunting scrapes, they have to meet a very specific criteria. They have to have excellent perimeter cover around the actual kill zone of the scrape area. They have to have adequate transition security cover to a known bedding area, because let's say you find a primary scrape area and you've got 200 yards of open timber, and then there's a bedding area on the other side of the timber. A mature buck in a state like a Michigan is not going to leave that bedding area and walk through that vulnerable 200 yards of open timber to access that primary scrape area. So even though the scrape area has good security cover around it, if it doesn't have good transition security cover to a known bedding area, the odds of a daytime visit by a mature buck are pretty close to zero. So all of the activity at a scrape area, no matter how active it is, how big they are, how deep they are in the ground, it's all irrelevant if the scrape area doesn't meet the criteria for a daytime visit by a buck that I want to kill. You may have 1.5 and 2.5-year-old bucks visiting that scrape area, but that's not what I'm after. For instance, let's say, like right up here at the top of this little ridge, there's a crop field. It's a big crop field. Now, if there's a scrape area on the edge of that crop field when I'm postseason scouting, in February, March, or April, if there's a scrape area, and there's a good tree next to it, there's a good chance I might set that tree up. Now, the only times I will hunt that scrape area is when the field is actually in standing corn, where they've got the excellent security cover, because a lot of times they'll bed in the standing corn, so they can take a couple steps out of the standing corn. They got that security cover right there for a quick exit and work a scrape. But if it's in an open, beans or hay or picked as soon as the corn is picked, I would never hunt that spot, because a mature buck is not going to visit that next to that big open vulnerable area during daylight hours. So scrape areas are phenomenal. They're also best hunted during pre-rut, like you're talking about, October 20th to 25th through November 5th, because at that time frame, the majority of the does are not in estrus. So they are actually, their testosterone's rising, and the mature bucks, they actually go out and start searching for those early estrus does. And when they're doing that, they're visiting their scrape areas. Scrape areas are 100% of the time always put where there's heavy doe activity. So that's why they're, during pre-rut, they're checking their scrape areas, because they're also checking for doe activity. And they'll freshen the scrapes up. Because usually if you've got matriarch does, and when they get close to coming into heat and into estrus, they will actually visit and loiter at those scrape areas, waiting for a buck to come in and pick them up. They prefer having the dominant buck pick them up, but if the dominant buck's doed up, the next one in line will pick it up. So scrape areas are awesome, but if they're not hunted correctly at the right time of season, the right time of day, and with the right type of security cover, they're a waste of time to hunt.
What are some of the right times of day, in your opinion, in terms of is it weather conditions, or is it time of day, location of the scrape, and approximation with the cover?
I will say weather conditions make a difference. It seems like after a rain, especially on I guess morning or evening, it doesn't really matter. After a rain, they like to freshen their scrapes up, especially during pre-rut, when they're not physically with a hot doe. But I've found my best time for hunting scrapes has been in the evenings. I don't know why, because I was just talking about, my 4 book bucks I got that I shot in the first 2 days of the season were all mornings. But I've definitely had my best scrape hunting activity and success in the evenings.